Freezing twins beg to be let into a stranger's house on a bitter winter night. Their tiny hands shake, their voices barely above a whisper, but the moment he hears what they say, the man's world shatters. Tears fill his eyes as he realizes these two little girls aren't just lost, they're a part of a heartbreaking truth he never saw coming. Why did they show up at his door? And what secret do they hold that will change his life forever? This is a story of fate, redemption, and the power of second chances. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The firelight danced across Jack Callahan's weathered face as he sat motionless in his worn leather armchair. His calloused fingers traced the rim of the whiskey glass, a nightly ritual that had become as familiar as breathing. Outside, the winter storm howled, throwing snowflakes against his windows like tiny fists demanding entry. The living room, with its dated wallpaper and sparse furniture, felt both too empty and too full, empty of life, but crowded with memories he couldn't shake. A layer of dust covered most surfaces, except for the small table beside his chair that held the half-empty bottle, and a single framed photograph he couldn't bring himself to look at tonight. The fire in the hearth sparked and crackled, sending shadows skittering across the walls. Jack's eyes were drawn to the flames despite himself. Even after 10 years, he couldn't help but see that other fire, the one that had devoured everything he loved. The sound of crackling wood brought back the roar of collapsing beams, the thick smoke that had blinded him as he fought to reach them. He lifted the glass to his lips, letting the whiskey burn away the memories. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked away the seconds, its steady rhythm matching the fall of snow outside. In this remote corner of town, visitors were rare. Most folks knew to leave Jack Callahan alone, and that's exactly how he wanted it. The sudden pounding at his door hit him like a physical blow. Jack jerked, whiskey sloshing over the rim of his glass. He set it down carefully, his firefighter's instincts already assessing the sound. Urgent, desperate, definitely not a casual visitor. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. Jack remained seated, his hands gripping the armrests. Nobody came here, not anymore, not since the funeral, when well-meaning neighbors had finally stopped trying to help him through his grief. But the pounding continued, transforming into frantic strikes against the wooden door. Something about the rhythm, the desperation in it, pulled him to his feet. His joints protested. He wasn't young anymore, and the cold didn't help. As he crossed the room, his reflection caught in the window. Gray threading his dark hair, lines etched deep around his mouth, eyes that had seen too much. The pounding stopped just as he reached for the handle. For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind. Then, a small voice called out, "Please." "Is anyone there?" Jack's hand froze on the doorknob. The voice was young, too young to be out in weather like this. He pulled the door open, and the wind rushed in, carrying swirls of snow and two tiny figures huddled together on his porch. They were small, maybe 6 years old, wearing coats that hung past their knees. Identical faces looked up at him, their cheeks red from cold, dark hair dusted with snow. Twins. Their hands were clasped together so tightly their knuckles showed white, and they swayed slightly as they stood there, exhausted and shivering. One of the girls, the one standing slightly in front of her sister, met his eyes. Despite her trembling lips and blue-tinged skin, there was a fierce determination in her gaze that hit Jack like a punch to the gut. It reminded him so much of Sarah, his daughter, on the day she'd decided to learn to ride a bike without training wheels. "Please, mister," the brave twin said, her teeth chattering. "We're really cold. Can we come inside?" Jack stared at them, his heart squeezing painfully in his chest. The protective sister, the quiet one behind her. It was too familiar, too raw. He wanted to shut the door, return to his whiskey and his solitude. He didn't need this, didn't want it. But the quiet twin suddenly stumbled, and her sister's grip tightened, keeping her upright. The movement snapped Jack back to the present, to the dangerous cold and the two very real, very vulnerable children standing on his doorstep. Without another word, he stepped aside, opening the door wider. The girls hesitated for just a moment before hurrying in, bringing with them a swirl of snowflakes and the scent of winter. Jack closed the door firmly against the howling wind, shutting out the storm but knowing somehow that he was letting in something that would change everything. As he turned to face the twins who stood huddled together in his entryway dripping melted snow onto his floor, Jack felt something shift inside him, something he'd thought had died in the flames 10 years ago. The brave twin still held her sister's hand, but now she was looking around his living room with wary eyes, as if assessing whether they'd made the right choice in coming here. Jack cleared his throat, surprised to find his voice rough with more than just disuse. "Let's get you warm," he said, moving toward the fireplace. He gestured to the couch, an old but comfortable piece of furniture that hadn't held visitors in years. "Sit there near the fire." The girls moved together, still connected by their clasped hands, and perched on the edge of the couch. Up close, he could see they were in worse shape than he'd first thought. Their coats were thin, more suitable for fall than a winter storm, and their shoes were soaked through. Jack quickly grabbed the Afghan from the back of his armchair, the one Sarah's grandmother had knitted, that he'd never had the heart to pack away, and draped it around their shoulders. The quiet twin pulled it close with her free hand, and for the first time she looked up at him. Her eyes were the same dark brown as her sister's, but filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered so softly he almost missed it. Those two simple words echoed in the room, mixing with the crackling of the fire and the howling wind outside. Jack stood there, looking down at these two little girls who had appeared on his doorstep like ghosts from his past, and felt the walls he'd built around his heart begin to crack. Jack fetched 2 dusty mugs and made hot cocoa, his routine movements feeling foreign. The twin girls sat pressed together on the couch, their thin faces lit by firelight. They startled at the kettle's whistle, eyes darting to the door. He added milk to their cocoa, remembering Sarah's impatience with hot drinks. He offered the mugs carefully. The quieter girl sipped, her eyes widening. From his armchair, he watched the braver twins study him, like the traumatized kids from his firefighting past. After introducing himself, they revealed their names, Mia and Lily. Mia shielded her sister as she explained their mother had told them to wait at the bus stop that morning. Jack called the police, triggering panic in both girls. Mia leapt up, pulling Lily behind her. "We don't want to go with them," Mia cried. "They'll separate us." Jack crouched down. "I won't let anyone separate you, but we need help." "That's what everyone says," Mia wavered. "Mama promised she'd come back." The word struck him, recalling Sarah's unfulfilled promises. These girls needed protection now. "I know you're scared," he said gently. "Let me help." "You won't let them separate us?" Mia asked quietly. "Number, I promise." As they relaxed, Jack felt something stir inside him. These abandoned sisters had breached his careful defenses. The winter night had deepened when headlights swept across Jack's living room windows. 2 police cruisers pulled into his driveway, their tires crunching on fresh snow. The girls, who had finally dozed off on his couch, stirred at the sound. Jack met the officers at the door before they could knock. "They just fell asleep," he whispered, ushering them inside. The officers, a weathered sergeant named Martinez and a younger officer named Brooks, nodded in understanding. The twins lay curled together under the blankets Jack had given them, their small hands still clasped, even in sleep. Their faces, peaceful in slumber, made his chest ache with memories of Sarah at that age. Martinez approached the couch quietly, but the floorboard's creak startled both girls awake. Lily's eyes flew open first, wide with fear. She tugged at Mia, who jolted upright, immediately positioning herself between her sister and the officers. "It's okay," Jack said quickly, moving closer to the couch. "These officers are here to help." "No," Mia's voice cracked. "We don't want to go." She wrapped her arms tighter around Lily, who had begun to cry silently. Officer Brooks stepped forward, her voice gentle. "Hey there, sweethearts. We just want to make sure you're safe." But the girls only pressed further into the couch cushions. Jack watched their mounting panic, recognizing the look of children who'd learned to fear authority figures. He'd seen it too many times during his firefighting days. "They need time," Jack said firmly, surprising himself with the protective edge in his voice. "They're exhausted and scared. Give them a minute to breathe." Martinez studied Jack for a moment, then nodded. "We'll need to ask them some questions, but it can wait a few minutes." He gestured for Jack to join them in the kitchen. As they moved away from the girls, Martinez pulled out his notebook. "We've been making calls since you reported this. Got some concerning information." Jack leaned against his counter, watching through the doorway as Officer Brooks tried to engage the twins in quiet conversation. "What kind of information?" "Their mother's name is Rebecca Torres," Martinez said, flipping through his notes. "Been on our radar for a while. Moves around a lot, mostly between women's shelters. No permanent address we can find." The sergeant's words painted a familiar picture. Another story of struggle and desperation. Jack had seen too many during his years of service. "Any family we can contact?" he asked. Brooks joined them in the kitchen, shaking her head. "No next of kin listed anywhere. Father was a firefighter, died in the line of duty 3 years ago. After that, Rebecca started moving around with the girls. No steady employment we can find." Jack's jaw tightened. Another firefighter's family torn apart. The weight of it settled heavy in his chest. "There's something else," Martinez said, his expression troubled. "When we checked the gas station where they were left, we found this." He pulled out an evidence bag containing a crumpled piece of paper. Jack took it, his breath catching as he read the familiar address, his address, written in hurried handwriting. "Ring any bells?" Martinez asked, watching him carefully. "No," Jack said, staring at the paper. "I've never heard of Rebecca Torres. Never met these girls before tonight." He looked up at the officers. "Why would she have my address?" Martinez shrugged. "That's what we're trying to figure out. Security footage shows her dropping the girls off at the gas station around 8 this morning. She bought them some food, told them to wait, and drove off. Station attendant says the girls stayed there until afternoon, then disappeared. Must have walked here in the storm." Jack glanced back at the twins. They had dozed off again, exhaustion finally winning over fear. Lily's head rested on Mia's shoulder, their faces nearly identical in sleep. Something about their presence in his home felt both completely foreign and oddly right. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. "We'll need to take them to the hospital, get them checked out," Brooks explained. "Then social services will place them in emergency foster care while we try to locate their mother." Jack nodded, but his chest tightened at the thought. These girls had already been through enough tonight. The idea of them being whisked away to strange places with strange people made his protective instincts flare again. He watched them sleep, their small forms dwarfed by his old couch. In just a few hours, they had transformed his quiet house into something else, something alive with worry and care and an odd sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He didn't know their full story yet, didn't understand why their mother had his address or what connection she might have to his past. But somehow, he was already tangled up in their lives. The mysterious note made him part of their story, whether he understood it or not. The officers moved toward the couch, ready to wake the girls, but Jack held up his hand. "Give them a few more minutes," he said softly. "Just let them rest a little longer." Martinez nodded, understanding in his eyes. They all stood in silence, watching the twins sleep peacefully, while outside, the snow continued to fall, covering their tracks to Jack's door in pristine white. The morning sun cast long shadows through the police station windows as Jack nursed his third cup of coffee. He hadn't slept much after the officers had taken the twins to the hospital. Their small, frightened faces haunted his thoughts all night. Officer Martinez approached him in the waiting area, his expression serious. "We found Rebecca Torres about an hour ago," he said, keeping his voice low. "She was in pretty rough shape, passed out in her car behind that old Quick Mart on Highway 12. Jack straightened in his chair. "Is she okay?" "Exhausted, dehydrated, but she'll be fine. They've got her on fluids now." Martinez paused, scratching his chin. "Thing is, when we found her, she was holding onto a piece of paper like her life depended on it. Your address again." Jack's stomach tightened. The coincidence felt too deliberate, too planned. "She say anything about why?" "That's why we called you in." Martinez gestured down the hallway. "She's asking for you. Says she needs to explain something." Jack followed Martinez through the station's fluorescent-lit corridors. His boots echoed against the linoleum floors, each step carrying him closer to answers he wasn't sure he wanted. They stopped at an interview room. Not an interrogation room, Jack noted. Whatever this was, they weren't treating Rebecca like a criminal. Martinez opened the door, and Jack's first glimpse of Rebecca Torres made his heart sink. She sat at the table, hands wrapped around a paper cup of water. Her dark hair hung limp around a face that spoke of too many sleepless nights. Her clothes, a worn sweater and jeans, hung loose on her thin frame. But it was her eyes that caught Jack's attention. Deep brown and intelligent, they carried a weight of exhaustion that seemed to go beyond physical tiredness. When she looked up at him, those eyes widened with recognition. "You're Jack Callahan," she whispered, her voice rough with emotion. Jack frowned, studying her face for any hint of familiarity. "Do I know you?" Tears welled in her eyes, spilling onto her hollow cheeks. "No," she said softly, "but my husband did." The words hit Jack like a physical blow. He sank into the chair across from her, his mind racing through faces from his past, trying to place her. "My husband was Miguel Torres," she continued, her fingers tightening around the paper cup. "You trained him at Station 47 about 5 years ago." The name clicked into place and Jack's blood ran cold. Miguel Torres, eager, talented, always first to volunteer for the toughest assignments. He'd died in a warehouse fire 3 years ago, trying to save a trapped worker. Miguel, Jack breathed, the memories flooding back. He was a good man, a damn good firefighter. Rebecca nodded, tears flowing freely now. "He talked about you all the time. The great Jack Callahan, the best trainer he'd ever had. He said you taught him everything he knew about being a real firefighter." Jack's throat tightened. He remembered Miguel's enthusiasm, his dedication to learning every aspect of the job. "I'm so sorry about what happened. I heard about the warehouse fire after I'd already left the department." "He knew the risks," Rebecca said, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. "We both did. But before he died, he told me something. He said, 'If anything ever happens to me, Jack Callahan is the kind of man you can trust.'" The words hung heavy in the small room. Jack gripped the edges of his chair, feeling the metal dig into his palms. The weight of Miguel's trust, passed on through his widow, pressed down on Jack's shoulders. "I didn't know where else to go," Rebecca continued, her voice breaking. "After Miguel died, everything fell apart. I couldn't keep a job, couldn't pay the bills. We moved from shelter to shelter. I tried so hard to keep it together for the girls, but..." She covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking. Jack sat there, stunned by the connection he never knew existed. Miguel had trusted him enough to make him a safety net for his family, a responsibility Jack hadn't even known about until this moment. "The girls," he said quietly. "They're Miguel's daughters?" Rebecca nodded, lowering her hands. "Mia and Lily. They were only 3 when he died. They barely remember him now." She reached into her sweater pocket and pulled out the crumpled paper with Jack's address. "I've carried this for 3 years. Miguel gave it to me just before the warehouse. Said you lived out of town now, but that you were the most honorable man he knew." Jack stared at the paper, understanding finally dawning. This wasn't just a random encounter. This wasn't just 2 lost girls showing up at his door. This was Miguel, reaching out from the past, entrusting his family to Jack's care. The reality of it all crashed into him like a wave. He didn't know these girls. He didn't know this woman. But somehow, they knew him. Through Miguel's stories, through his trust, through his final act of trying to protect his family, they knew him. And now their lives were tangled together in a way he never saw coming. Jack sat motionless across from Rebecca in the small interview room, his coffee growing cold beside him. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows under her eyes, making her exhaustion even more apparent. His mind struggled to process everything she'd told him, sifting through memories of countless young firefighters he'd trained over the years. "Lucas," he said softly, the name feeling foreign on his tongue. "Lucas Torres." Rebecca nodded, her fingers fidgeting with a loose thread on her sweater. "He started at Station 47 in the spring of 2018. You were his first training officer." The details started coming back to Jack in fragments. A young man with an eager smile and determined eyes, always first to arrive, last to leave. Jack remembered now. Lucas had been different from the others. He'd had something to prove. "He used to come home talking about you," Rebecca continued, her voice growing stronger with the memories. "Every night at dinner, it was, 'Jack said this,' or 'Jack showed us that.' He'd practice the knots you taught him right there at the kitchen table." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "I'd find rope everywhere in the house." Jack's throat tightened. He remembered those training sessions, teaching the rookies the importance of every detail, every procedure. Lucas had absorbed it all like a sponge. "He called you the man who never gives up," Rebecca said, meeting Jack's eyes. "Said you were the toughest trainer he'd ever had, but also the most dedicated. He told me about the time you spent 6 hours after shift helping him master the rescue carries until he got them perfect." The memory hit Jack hard. It had been a brutally hot day and Lucas had been struggling with the techniques, but he'd refused to quit, and something about his determination had reminded Jack of himself at that age. "Lucas was a good student," Jack managed, his voice rough. "He had what it took." Rebecca's eyes welled with fresh tears. "He was so proud when he graduated training. Said he couldn't have done it without you." She paused, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. "We had just found out I was pregnant with the twins. He was over the moon about becoming a father." Jack felt a familiar ache in his chest. He knew where this story was going. He'd lived through too many similar ones not to recognize the signs. "The girls were only 6 months old when it happened," Rebecca continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "A factory fire on the east side. Lucas went in after hearing there might be workers trapped inside." She drew a shaky breath. "The roof collapsed before he could get out." Jack closed his eyes, memories of his own losses threatening to overwhelm him. How many good firefighters had he known who'd died exactly that way? How many families had been left behind? "After Lucas died, I tried to keep it together," Rebecca said. "I had some savings and his pension helped for a while. But with 2 babies," she shook her head. "The medical bills started piling up. Lily had breathing problems from being born early. I had to quit my teaching job to care for them. Then the house went into foreclosure." Jack listened in silence, the weight of guilt pressing heavier on his chest with each word. He'd trained Lucas, taught him everything he knew. But in the end, it hadn't been enough to save him, and now his death had created ripples that had destroyed his family's entire world. "We moved from place to place," Rebecca continued. "Shelters, mostly. I picked up whatever work I could find, but it was never enough. The girls..." Her voice broke. "They deserved so much better than what I could give them." She pulled out the crumpled paper with Jack's address again, smoothing it carefully on the table. "Lucas gave me this the week before he died. Said if anything ever happened to him, you were someone I could trust, someone who would understand." She looked up at Jack, her eyes desperate. "I held on to it all these years, telling myself I'd never need it. But last night, when I couldn't take it anymore..." Jack stared at his address written in Lucas's familiar handwriting. He remembered the young firefighter's determination, his unwavering faith in the job, and the people who did it. Lucas had trusted Jack enough to make him his family's last resort, a responsibility Jack hadn't even known about until now. Officer Martinez knocked softly before entering the room. "Mr. Callahan? Could we speak with you outside for a moment?" Jack nodded, standing slowly. His joints felt stiff as if he'd aged years in the past hour. In the hallway, Martinez spoke in low tones. "Social Services is evaluating Mrs. Torres's situation," he explained. "Given her current circumstances and history of instability, there's a good chance the girls will be placed in foster care. Probably separate homes given their age." Jack glanced back through the window at Rebecca. She sat hunched over the table, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Her trembling hands covered her face, but Jack could see the desperation in every line of her body. This wasn't just another case file or another sad story. This was Lucas Torres's family, the family he'd trusted Jack to look out for. For the first time in years, Jack felt the weight of responsibility for someone else's fate settling onto his shoulders. He wasn't sure why, but something deep inside him knew he couldn't let this be the end of their story. Later, Jack's truck rumbled down the snowy road toward his house, its headlights cutting through the darkness. His mind kept replaying the conversation with Rebecca, the weight of Lucas Torres's trust pressing heavily on his shoulders. The wind had picked up, sending snowflakes swirling in chaotic patterns across his windshield. When he pulled into his driveway, he saw Officer Martinez's patrol car still parked outside. The social worker they'd assigned to the case had stayed behind to watch the girls while Jack was at the station. Through the living room window, he could see the warm glow of his fireplace. Jack sat in his truck for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel. The last time he'd had children in his house was... He pushed the thought away and forced himself to get out of the vehicle. Inside, he found Mia and Lily still curled up together on his couch, sharing a blanket. They'd fallen asleep watching cartoons on his rarely used TV. The social worker, Ms. Peterson, sat in the armchair nearby, typing on her laptop. "They've been perfect angels," she whispered, gathering her things. "Barely made a peep since you left." Jack nodded, his eyes fixed on the sleeping girls. In the firelight, their faces looked so peaceful, so unaware of the complicated adult world spinning around them. Ms. Peterson touched his arm lightly as she passed. "We'll be in touch tomorrow about arrangements," she said softly before slipping out the door. The house fell silent except for the crackling fire and the girls' steady breathing. Jack sank into his chair by the fireplace, feeling every one of his years in his bones. The police had been clear. He had no obligation to these children. They weren't his responsibility. He'd already done more than most would by taking them in that first night. So why did it feel like they were his responsibility? He watched the flames dance, remembering Lucas Torres's handwriting on that crumpled piece of paper. The young firefighter had trusted Jack enough to make him his family's safety net, even if Jack hadn't known about it until now. That trust felt like a weight around his neck, but also like a lifeline pulling him back towards something he'd lost long ago, a sense of purpose. The storm outside grew stronger, rattling the windows. Neither girl stirred, secure in their exhausted sleep. Jack wondered what they'd been through in their short lives, moving from shelter to shelter, watching their mother struggle to keep them fed and housed. No child should have to worry about such things. Morning came too quickly, bringing with it a phone call Jack had been dreading. He answered it in his kitchen, speaking quietly to avoid waking the girls. "Mr. Callahan," Officer Martinez's voice crackled through the speaker. "We need to discuss temporary arrangements for the twins." Jack's stomach tightened. What kind of arrangements? "The court needs time to evaluate Rebecca Torres's fitness as a parent. In the meantime, we need someone to act as temporary guardian for Mia and Lily." "And?" Martinez cleared his throat. "Given the circumstances and the connection through their father, we thought perhaps—" "No," Jack cut him off. "I can't. I'm not." He glanced toward the living room where the girls still slept. "I'm not qualified to take care of kids. They need somewhere to stay, Mr. Callahan, somewhere safe. There must be other options. Foster homes, temporary facilities." A commotion in the background interrupted him. He heard a familiar voice, high-pitched and distressed. "Where's Mr. Jack? We want to stay with him." It was Mia. Jack's chest tightened at the panic in her voice. Martinez sighed heavily. "Look, Callahan, they trust you. That's rare with kids who've been through what they have. And to be honest, we don't have anywhere else for them right now. All our emergency placements are full, and splitting them up would be traumatic." Jack rubbed his face with his free hand, feeling the rough stubble under his palm. His house was quiet, empty. Had been for years. Just the way he liked it. Just the way he deserved after failing his own family. "How long?" he asked finally. "Just a few weeks. Until we can sort everything out with their mother in the court." Jack looked around his kitchen. The dishes from last night's hot cocoa still sat in the sink. 2 small cups with chocolate residue dried at the bottom. On his refrigerator, a crayon drawing appeared. He hadn't even noticed Lily making it. It showed 3 stick figures, 2 small ones holding hands with a larger one. His gaze drifted to the living room. The couch where the girls now slept was the same one where his daughter used to curl up for their Sunday movie nights. For years, he'd avoided looking at it too long, the memories too painful. Now it held new life, new possibilities, and new chances to fail. "Fine," he muttered into the phone. "But just until things are sorted out." Martinez's relief was audible. "Thank you, Mr. Callahan. We'll bring over their things and the temporary custody papers within the hour." True to his word, Martinez arrived just as Jack was finishing making breakfast for the girls. They sat at his kitchen table, small legs swinging as they ate pancakes he'd found in the freezer. The police cruiser's lights reflected off the snow outside, casting blue shadows through the windows. Jack stood in his doorway watching as Martinez and another officer carried in 2 small backpacks, everything the girls owned in the world. Mia and Lily appeared in the hallway behind him, their faces uncertain as they watched the officers. "Everything's going to be okay," Martinez assured them, setting down their bags. "Mr. Jack is going to let you stay with him for a while." The girls looked up at Jack, their eyes wide with hope and fear mixed together. He felt the weight of their gaze, the trust they were placing in him despite barely knowing him. As he stood there, watching 2 little girls shuffle inside his house, really inside, not just as temporary guests, Jack knew one thing for sure. His life would never be the same again. The first rays of morning sunlight had barely crept through Jack's windows when a thunderous crash jolted him from his sleep. His heart raced as he bolted upright, years of firefighter training kicking in. The sound had come from his kitchen. Jack threw off his covers and rushed down the hallway, his bare feet slapping against the cold hardwood floors. As he rounded the corner into the kitchen, he skidded to a stop, his mouth falling open at the scene before him. Flour covered every surface like a fresh blanket of snow. A puddle of milk spread across the floor, dripping steadily from the counter's edge. In the middle of this disaster stood Mia and Lily, both wearing his oversized kitchen aprons that draped around them like dresses. Their faces and pajamas were dusted white with flour, and guilty grins spread across their faces. "Mr. Jack," Lily's eyes lit up as she struggled with the spatula in her small hand, attempting to flip a partially blackened pancake that stuck stubbornly to the pan. "We made breakfast." Jack ran his hand down his face, feeling a headache building behind his eyes. The clock on the wall read 6:15 a.m. He hadn't woken up this early since leaving the fire department. "We wanted to surprise you," Mia explained, standing on a chair to reach the stove. "But the flour bag was really heavy, and the milk jug slipped, and the eggs—" Her voice trailed off as she gestured to the floor where broken eggshells littered the ground. Jack surveyed the damage. His normally pristine kitchen looked like a war zone. The mixing bowl teetered precariously close to the counter's edge, and batter dripped down the cabinet doors. The smell of burning pancake filled the air. "What has he gotten himself into?" he muttered under his breath. Over the next few days, Jack's quiet, orderly life transformed into something he barely recognized. The girls seemed to fill every corner of his house with noise and energy, their presence impossible to ignore. His morning coffee routine now included making hot chocolate and ensuring they ate proper breakfasts. His evening television news was replaced by animated movies and endless questions about everything from why the sky was blue to where baby birds came from. Mia especially seemed determined to test his limits. She questioned every rule, challenged every boundary. When he told her not to jump on the furniture, she asked why. When he said bedtime was at 8, she negotiated for 8:30. She was bright and quick-witted, reminding him painfully of another little girl who had once filled his house with similar energy. Lily was different. While Mia charged ahead, Lily observed. She would sit quietly with her coloring books, but Jack often caught her watching him with those thoughtful brown eyes. She noticed things: how he always checked the locks twice before bed, how he flinched slightly when the fire crackled too loudly, how he sometimes stared at nothing with a faraway look in his eyes. On their 4th night, as Jack tucked them into their temporary beds in his spare room, Lily caught him off guard. Her small voice pierced the quiet darkness just as he was about to leave. "Do you have a daughter, Mr. Jack?" The question hit him like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. His hand froze on the doorknob, and for a moment he couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The image of Sarah, his little girl with her gap-toothed smile and untamable curls, flashed through his mind. He swallowed hard, his throat tight. I did. A long time ago. From her bed, Mia's sleepy voice drifted through the darkness. What happened to her? Jack's eyes burned as he stared at the floor, seeing nothing but memories. The flames, the smoke, the empty bedroom where he couldn't reach her in time. His voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. She's gone. The silence that followed felt heavy, filled with unspoken understanding that seemed beyond the girl's years. Then he heard the rustle of blankets as Lily scooted closer to the edge of her bed, closer to him. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice small but sincere. Something in Jack's chest cracked at those simple words. He stood there, one hand still on the doorknob, as waves of grief he'd kept locked away for years washed over him. Behind him, he could hear the steady breathing of two little girls who had somehow worked their way past his carefully constructed walls. After they fell asleep, Jack remained seated in the chair between their beds, watching their peaceful faces in the dim glow of the nightlight. 10 years. He'd spent 10 years in this house alone, speaking to almost no one, letting the silence fill the spaces where his family used to be. He'd convinced himself that's what he deserved, to be alone with his guilt and his memories. But now, surrounded by the soft sounds of children sleeping, Jack felt something shift inside him. The emptiness that had become his constant companion didn't feel quite so overwhelming. The silence that had been his punishment was broken by gentle breaths and occasional murmurs from the twins. For the first time in a decade, Jack wasn't alone. The realization terrified him as much as it comforted him. The next day, morning light streamed into Jack's bedroom at 5:30 a.m. His firefighter's internal clock persisted after retirement, but today felt different. The house wasn't empty anymore. He walked down the hallway, hearing soft snores from the twins' room. The house felt alive with their presence. The living room showed signs of habitation: purple rain boots by the door, Lily's one-eyed Mr. Fuzzy on the couch, and Mia's drawings scattered across the coffee table. Jack surveyed the space that had been a shrine to Sarah and Claire. Among the unchanged family photos and Sarah's blanket, new life sprouted. Children's artwork on the fridge, scattered hair ties, and bedtime stories by his recliner. After breakfast cleanup, Jack took the girls grocery shopping. At the store, Mia requested Lucky Charms while Lily lobbied for chocolate milk. Martha Wilson from the diner spotted them. Jack Callahan with kids? She marveled. He explained briefly about temporarily housing the twins. It suits you, she said knowingly. That evening, Jack reviewed paperwork while the girls played with their new toy horses. Mia declared one both princess and knight, triggering a phantom echo of Claire's laughter. Jack gripped the couch, his chest tight. For a decade, grief had been his shield. Now, watching the twins play, something new grew alongside his loss, like fresh leaves on an old tree. This unfamiliar feeling terrified him more than any fire. The morning sun had barely risen when the sound of giggling drifted through Jack's house. His eyes opened slowly, taking in the unfamiliar noise. For a moment he lay there, letting the sound wash over him. It was strange how quickly the silence of his home had been replaced by these little bursts of joy. Following the sound, Jack made his way downstairs, his bare feet padding quietly on the wooden floors. He found Mia and Lily sitting cross-legged in the living room, surrounded by something he hadn't seen in years. His old collection of firefighter figurines. His breath caught in his throat. The box containing those toys had been sealed and stored away in the attic, along with other remnants of his past life. The girls must have found them while exploring. "Look, Mr. Jack!" Mia's face lit up when she saw him, holding up a small plastic firefighter complete with a tiny red axe. "You were a hero!" Jack stood frozen in the doorway, his throat suddenly tight. Hero. The word hit him like a physical blow. He hadn't felt like one in a long time, not since the night he couldn't save his own family. "Were these yours?" Lily asked softly, carefully arranging the figurines in a neat line. She handled them with such gentleness, as if she understood their importance. "Yeah," Jack managed to say, his voice rough. "From a long time ago." "Can you tell us about being a firefighter?" Mia's eyes sparkled with curiosity. She scooted over, making space for him on the floor. Jack hesitated, then slowly lowered himself to sit with them. The hardwood floor was uncomfortable, but the eager faces looking up at him made it worth it. "Well," he began, picking up one of the figurines, "being a firefighter means always being ready to help others." As the days passed, Jack found himself adapting to the presence of the twins in ways he never expected. His refrigerator, once home to nothing but takeout containers and beer, now held fresh vegetables and milk. The kitchen counter bore evidence of actual cooking, recipe books propped open, measuring cups left out to dry, cookie sheets cooling on the rack. Every night he found himself double-checking the locks on all the doors and windows, not out of the old habit born from depression and isolation, but because he worried about keeping the girls safe. He'd installed a nightlight in their room after Lily mentioned being afraid of the dark. He'd even bought them proper pajamas to replace the oversized t-shirts they'd arrived in. One sunny afternoon while the girls were coloring at the kitchen table, the phone rang. It was Rebecca, calling from the shelter where she was staying. The system only allowed her short phone calls, but the twins' faces lit up instantly at the sound of their mother's voice on speakerphone. "Hi, babies," Rebecca's voice crackled through the line, tired but warm. "Are you being good for Mr. Jack?" "Yes, Mama," they chorused. Lily clutched her colored pencil tighter, hanging on every word. "I'm doing better," Rebecca continued. "The program's here. They're helping. I'm taking classes, and I'm going to meetings every day." Her voice caught slightly. "I'm doing my best to get my life together. I miss you both so much." Jack stood in the corner of the kitchen, giving them space but unable to leave completely. He watched as Mia and Lily shared stories about their days, the pancakes they'd learned to make, the pictures they'd drawn, the toys they'd found. Their voices were excited but held an undercurrent of longing that made his heart ache. After the call ended, silence filled the kitchen. Mia stared at her half-finished drawing, her small fingers tracing the edges of the paper. Then she looked up at Jack, her eyes serious beyond her years. "Mr. Jack," she said quietly, "if Mama can't take care of us, will we have to leave?" The question hit Jack like a punch to the gut. He looked at their faces, Mia's determined, Lily's anxious, and felt the weight of their fear. These girls had already lost so much, been moved around so many times. "Let's not worry about that yet," he said finally, his voice gentle but uncertain. That night, after tucking the girls into bed, Jack found himself standing in his bedroom, staring at the photograph that had haunted him for 10 years. Sarah smiled back at him, her arms wrapped around a beaming Claire. They looked so happy, so alive, captured in that moment before everything changed. The same question Mia had asked earlier echoed in his mind. What happens when this isn't temporary anymore? He touched the frame of the photograph, tracing the familiar edges. The girls sleeping down the hall weren't replacements for what he'd lost. He knew that. But somehow they'd started filling his empty house with something he'd thought was gone forever. Hope. What would Sarah think of all this? He could almost hear her laugh, see her shaking her head at how this gruff, broken man had ended up with 2 little girls who seemed determined to bring him back to life. She had always believed in second chances. Jack's fingers lingered on the photograph as moonlight streamed through his window. The question hung in the air, unanswered, but impossible to ignore. What happens when temporary becomes permanent? What happens when the walls he'd built around his heart aren't just cracking but crumbling completely? He had no answers yet, but for the first time in 10 years he was starting to think maybe that was okay. That night the house was quiet except for the soft whisper of wind outside when Jack jolted awake. His heart hammered in his chest, remnants of the familiar nightmare, smoke, flames, screams, still clinging to his consciousness. But as his mind cleared, he realized the sounds weren't from his dream. Muffled sobs echoed down the hallway from the girls' room. Jack threw off his covers and moved quickly through the darkness, his feet finding their way by memory. The door to the girls' room was slightly ajar, letting in a thin slice of hallway light. Inside, he could make out 2 small shapes in their beds. One of them was shaking. Lily sat curled into a tight ball, her blanket wrapped around her shoulders like a shield. Tears streamed down her face, catching the faint light as they fell. Her small body trembled with each sob, though she was trying to stay quiet. On the other bed, Mia remained still, her breathing steady in sleep. Jack stood in the doorway for a moment, frozen. The sight of a crying child hit him hard, bringing back memories of Claire's nightmares, of holding her until the monsters went away. But Claire wasn't here anymore, and this was Lily, a little girl who needed him now. Moving carefully to avoid startling her, Jack approached Lily's bed. The floorboards creaked slightly under his weight, and Lily's head snapped up. Her eyes were wide and wet, her cheeks stained with tears. "Hey, kiddo," Jack whispered, keeping his voice low to avoid waking Mia. "Bad dream?" Lily's lower lip trembled. She shook her head, more tears spilling over. Jack slowly lowered himself to sit on the edge of her bed, the mattress dipping under his weight. He felt awkward and out of practice. It had been 10 years since he'd comforted a child in the middle of the night. "Mama left us." Lily's voice was barely audible, broken by hiccups. She clutched her blanket tighter, as if it could somehow protect her from the pain of that truth. In the other bed, Mia stirred slightly but didn't wake. Jack watched her roll over, grateful that at least one of them was getting some rest. He turned his attention back to Lily, who looked so small and fragile in the dim light. After a moment's hesitation, Jack carefully placed his hand on Lily's back. The touch was awkward but firm, an anchor in her storm of emotions. He could feel her trembling beneath his palm. "Your mom didn't want to leave you," he said softly, trying to find the right words. "She's trying to come back." Lily lifted her tear-stained face to look at him. "Promise?" Her voice carried all the weight of a child's desperate need for certainty in an uncertain world. Jack felt the word hit him like a physical blow. Promise. He wasn't a man who made promises anymore. Hadn't been since the night he promised Sarah he'd be home early, since he promised Claire he'd never let anything bad happen to her. He'd broken too many promises already, their shattered remains scattered through his past like broken glass. But looking into Lily's big, teary eyes, Jack found himself saying, "Yeah, kid, I promise." The words surprised him as much as they seemed to comfort her. Lily's breathing began to steady, her sobs quieting to occasional hiccups. She uncurled slightly from her tight ball, leaning almost imperceptibly toward Jack's solid presence. Without thinking, Jack began to rub small circles on her back, the way he used to do for Claire. The familiar motion brought a lump to his throat, but he kept going, watching as Lily's eyelids grew heavy. "Try to get some sleep," he murmured. "I'll stay right here." Lily nodded sleepily, her small hand reaching out to grab a fistful of Jack's shirt. She held on as if afraid he might disappear, and Jack felt something in his chest tighten. Gradually, her grip loosened as sleep reclaimed her, but Jack didn't move. He sat there in the darkness, Lily's hand still clutching his shirt, and stared at the ceiling. The moonlight cast strange shadows across the room, dancing patterns that reminded him of how quickly everything had changed. Just weeks ago, this room had been empty, gathering dust like everything else in his life. Now it held 2 sleeping children who had somehow worked their way past all his carefully constructed defenses. Jack couldn't pinpoint exactly when he'd started caring this much. Maybe it was the first morning they made pancakes, or when Lily showed him her drawings, or when Mia asked about his firefighting days with such genuine interest. Maybe it was all of those moments combined, slowly chipping away at the walls he'd built around his heart. He looked down at Lily's peaceful face, all traces of tears now gone in sleep. Her trust in him was terrifying and wonderful all at once. She believed him when he said her mother would come back, believed in him in a way he hadn't believed in himself for years. Hours later, Jack pushed the shopping cart down the grocery store aisle, watching as Mia and Lily debated the merits of different cereal boxes. Their animated discussion brought curious glances from other shoppers, but he was getting used to the attention. 2 weeks ago, he would have bristled at being the center of town gossip. Now, he found himself caring less about the whispers and sideways looks. "Can we get both?" Lily asked hopefully, holding up 2 boxes with bright cartoon characters on them. "One," Jack said firmly, though the stern effect was somewhat ruined by the slight upturn of his lips. "Choose wisely." While the girls conducted their serious cereal deliberations, Jack felt a familiar presence approach. He turned to find Chief Reynolds standing there, his firefighter's uniform as crisp as ever, a knowing smile playing on his weathered face. "Didn't think I'd see the day, Callahan," Reynolds said, his eyes moving from Jack to the twins and back again. There was something both amused and warm in his expression, like he was witnessing something he'd long hoped for but never expected to see. Jack shifted uncomfortably, suddenly very aware of how different this scene must look from his usual solitary grocery runs. "Just picking up some things," he muttered, trying to brush off the significance of the moment. "They yours?" Reynolds asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "No," Jack said immediately, the denial automatic and sharp. But as the words left his mouth, something about them felt wrong, almost dishonest. He glanced at Mia and Lily, still engrossed in their cereal selection, and felt an uncomfortable tightness in his chest. Reynolds watched this internal struggle play across Jack's face with the patience of someone who had known him for years. "Got time for coffee?" he asked casually, though there was nothing casual about the invitation. It was the same tone he'd used years ago when Jack was struggling with particularly difficult calls. Jack hesitated. He hadn't really spoken to anyone from his old life since everything. But something in Reynolds' expression made him nod. "Girls," he called, "we're going to get coffee after this. That okay?" "Can we get hot chocolate?" Mia asked, finally settling on a cereal box. "Sure," Jack found himself saying, earning a surprised look from Reynolds. The old Jack would never have agreed so easily. 20 minutes later, they sat in the local diner, the girls happily sipping their hot chocolates while Jack and Reynolds nursed their coffees. The conversation had stayed safe at first, weather, town gossip, simple things, but Jack could feel the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Finally, Reynolds set down his cup. "You know," he said carefully, "I think about that night too. The fire." Jack's hands tightened around his coffee cup, his knuckles turning white. He didn't need to ask which fire. There was only one that mattered. "You did everything you could," Reynolds continued, his voice gentle but firm. Jack stared down at his coffee, watching the dark liquid ripple with his trembling hands. "Wasn't enough," he said, the words barely audible. 10 years later, and they still tasted like ash in his mouth. From the corner of his eye, he could see Mia and Lily sharing a cookie, completely oblivious to the heavy conversation happening across the table. Their innocent presence somehow made the weight of the past both harder and easier to bear. "They seem happy with you," Reynolds observed, following Jack's gaze. Jack found himself talking before he could stop himself. "Their mother. She's trying to get back on her feet. If she can't..." He took a deep breath. "I'm considering keeping them." The words hung in the air between them, the first time Jack had voiced this possibility aloud. Reynolds watched him closely, years of friendship and understanding reflected in his eyes. "Maybe this is your second chance," Reynolds said quietly. Jack scoffed, but the words burrowed deep inside him, taking root whether he wanted them to or not. He watched as Lily carefully broke their cookie in half, making sure Mia got an equal share. Such a simple act of kindness, yet it made his chest ache with something that felt dangerously like hope. That evening, back at home, Jack sat in his usual chair, watching the girls play near the fireplace. The flames that had once been his enemy now cast a warm glow over their small faces as they built elaborate stories with their toys. Mia was crafting some tale about a brave princess, while Lily added sound effects and moved the characters around. Reynolds' words echoed in his mind. "Maybe this is your second chance." Jack had never wanted a second chance. He'd never asked for one. Never thought he deserved one. He'd built his life around the absence of hope, around the certainty that his story had ended in that fire 10 years ago. This wasn't the life he had planned, sitting here watching two little girls who weren't his, feeling his heart twist every time they smiled or laughed or looked to him for approval. But as he sat there, surrounded by the sounds of their play and the warmth of the fire, he couldn't deny that something had changed. Maybe this wasn't the life he'd planned, but watching Mia act out her story while Lily giggled at her sister's antics, Jack wondered if maybe, just maybe, it was the life he needed. Days later, the snowstorm came without warning, transforming the peaceful winter afternoon into a howling white tempest. Jack stood at the window, watching as thick snowflakes swirled and danced in the fierce wind. The old house creaked and groaned under the assault of the storm, but inside it remained warm and secure. He moved to the fireplace, methodically adding another log. The flames crackled and popped, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Years ago, the sound would have sent him spiraling into dark memories, but today it felt different. The fire wasn't an enemy anymore. It was protection against the cold, providing warmth and light for the little family that had unexpectedly formed in his home. Mia and Lily sat cross-legged on the floor, an old deck of cards spread between them. They'd found the cards in a drawer earlier that day, and after Jack had shown them how to play Go Fish, they'd been absorbed in the game for hours. "Got any threes?" Mia asked, her face scrunched in concentration. Lily giggled, shaking her head. "Go Fish." Mia dramatically flopped backward onto the carpet. "That's like the 100th time." "You're just bad at guessing," Lily teased, arranging her cards with careful precision. Jack watched them from his chair, something warm and unfamiliar settling in his chest. The scene before him was so ordinary. 2 children playing cards on a snowy afternoon, yet it felt extraordinary. The house that had been his self-imposed prison for so long now felt alive, filled with laughter and light despite the storm raging outside. For the first time in years, Jack felt something close to contentment. It wasn't happiness exactly. He wasn't sure he remembered what that felt like. But it was peaceful. Right. Like pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place. As evening approached, the storm intensified. The wind howled louder, rattling the windows with increasing force. Jack was just about to suggest making dinner when the lights flickered once, twice, and then plunged the house into darkness. "Mr. Jack?" Lily's voice came small and worried from the darkness. "It's okay," Jack said, his voice steady and calm. "Stay where you are. I'll get some candles." He moved through the familiar space with practiced ease, retrieving candles from various drawers and cabinets. Soon, warm yellow light filled the room again, creating a cozy atmosphere that made the storm seem far away. "This is like camping," Mia declared, helping Jack arrange the candles safely around the room. "Can we make s'mores?" Jack was about to answer when a knock at the door cut through the howling wind. He froze, every muscle tensing. Nobody should be out in weather like this. The girls must have sensed his unease because they both went quiet, watching him with wide eyes. Moving to the door, Jack opened it cautiously. A man stood on his porch, snow coating his heavy winter coat. Jack recognized him immediately. David Chen, Rebecca's caseworker. The serious expression on Chen's face made Jack's stomach drop. "We need to talk," Chen said, his voice grave. Jack stepped aside, letting him in. The girls had moved closer together, sensing the tension in the room. "Girls," Jack said, keeping his voice light, "why don't you go upstairs and get ready for bed? I'll be up in a few minutes." They went without argument, which was unusual enough to increase Jack's worry. Once they were out of earshot, Chen spoke quietly. "Rebecca missed her court meeting today," he said, removing his snow-covered coat. "She's relapsed, Jack. We found drug paraphernalia in her room at the shelter." Jack closed his eyes briefly, feeling the weight of those words settle on his shoulders. "How bad?" "Bad enough," Chen sighed. The judge was already concerned about her history of instability. This doesn't look good. Her chances of regaining custody are dropping fast." Jack clenched his jaw, looking toward the stairs where the girls had disappeared. "They don't know yet," he said. "They still think she's getting better, that she's coming back for them." "They need to be prepared for the possibility that she won't," Chen said gently. "The system doesn't like uncertainty. If Rebecca can't prove she's fit, we'll need to start looking at permanent placement options." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Jack ran a hand over his face, feeling the rough scratch of stubble against his palm. "How do I tell them?" he asked, more to himself than Chen. "How do I tell them their mother might not be able to take them back?" Chen didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched the fire dancing in the fireplace, its light reflecting in his eyes. "They trust you, Jack. That's more important than you might think." Whatever happens next, they need that trust. After Chen left, disappearing back into the storm, Jack sat alone in the candlelit room. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows across the floor. Outside, the wind continued its assault on the house, but Jack barely heard it. His mind was too full of possibilities he'd been avoiding, decisions he wasn't sure he was ready to make. The future was coming faster than he'd expected. These past few weeks had been a temporary arrangement, a stopgap measure until Rebecca got better. But now, with her relapse, everything was changing. The questions he'd been pushing away could no longer be ignored. Jack stared into the fire, watching the flames dance and flicker. Would he fight for these girls, or would he let them go? The answer waited somewhere in the darkness of his heart, but he wasn't ready to face it. Not yet. The morning sun crept through the kitchen windows, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Jack stood at the counter, his coffee untouched, watching Mia and Lily eat their breakfast. They sat at the small kitchen table, their legs swinging beneath their chairs as they devoured their cereal, completely oblivious to the weight pressing down on Jack's shoulders. "Can we have pancakes tomorrow?" Lily asked, milk dripping down her chin. She wiped it away with her sleeve, a habit Jack had tried and failed to break over the past few weeks. "Yeah, the ones with chocolate chips," Mia chimed in, her spoon clattering against the bowl as she gestured enthusiastically. Jack nodded absently, his mind still replaying the conversation with the caseworker from the night before. Rebecca's relapse, the missed court date. The implications hung over him like a dark cloud, making even this simple morning routine feel heavy with unspoken truths. "Mr. Jack?" Lily's voice pulled him back to the present. "You didn't drink your coffee? Is it yucky?" "No, kiddo, just thinking." Jack forced himself to take a sip of the now lukewarm coffee. The girls had learned to make it for him, though it was always too weak and had too much sugar. He drank it anyway. The morning routine continued as usual, getting dressed, brushing teeth, packing small backpacks for the day's activities. Jack went through the motions automatically, his mind elsewhere. Every laugh, every innocent question from the girls felt like a reminder of what he needed to tell them. As the day progressed, Jack tried to maintain normalcy. He helped them with their reading practice, watched them draw pictures, and even managed to fix the loose wheel on Lily's toy car. But the truth lingered just beneath the surface, making every interaction feel somehow false. "When is Mama coming to visit?" Mia asked during lunch, pushing her peas around her plate. She said on the phone she'd try to come soon. Jack's hand stilled over the sink where he was washing dishes. For the first time since they'd started asking about their mother, he hesitated. The pause lasted only a second, but it was enough. Mia's fork stopped moving. She looked up at Jack, her eyes narrowing slightly. Even at 6 years old, she had an uncanny ability to read people. "Mr. Jack, is something wrong?" Jack dried his hand slowly on a dish towel, buying time. He turned to face them, leaning back against the counter. Lily had stopped eating too, watching him with wide eyes. "There's been a delay," he said carefully, choosing each word with deliberate precision. Lily's forehead wrinkled in confusion, like when we have to wait for cookies to cool. Jack felt his lips twitch into a small, sad smile. "Yeah, kid. Something like that." "But Mama's okay, right?" Mia pressed, her voice taking on an edge of worry that no 6-year-old should have to carry. "She's..." Jack struggled, caught between truth and protection. "She's working on getting better. Sometimes that takes longer than we want it to." The girls seemed to accept this explanation, but Jack could see the shadows of doubt creeping into their expressions. They were young, but they weren't stupid. They'd lived through enough uncertainty to recognize when adults were hiding things from them. The rest of the day passed in a blur of forced normality. Jack helped them build a fort out of blankets in the living room, read them their favorite story twice, and let them stay up 15 minutes past their bedtime. Each moment felt like borrowed time, like he was protecting a bubble of happiness that could pop at any moment. After tucking them in, Jack returned to the living room. The house felt different in these quiet evening hours. less like the prison it had been for the past decade, and more like a shelter, a haven. He sat heavily on the couch, pulling out the folder of legal paperwork the caseworker had left behind. The documents were filled with legal jargon and official stamps, but their meaning was clear enough. If Rebecca lost her parental rights, the girls would need a permanent home, and Jack could fight to adopt them. He stared at the papers, his hands resting heavily on the manila folder. The choice before him seemed impossible. On one side lay the comfortable solitude he'd built around himself like a wall, protecting him from any more loss or pain. On the other side was the chance to be a father again, to give these girls the stability they desperately needed. But did he have the right? These weren't his children. They had a mother who loved them, even if she couldn't care for them properly. Would taking them be another form of theft, like the fire that had stolen his own family? The paperwork sat accusingly on his lap, demanding answers to questions he wasn't ready to face. Through the thin walls, he could hear Lily's soft snoring and Mia's occasional murmur in her sleep. Somewhere in the night, a decision waited to be made. But for now, Jack just sat in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the little family that had stumbled into his life, wondering if he had the strength to either keep them or let them go. The morning air was crisp as Jack's truck pulled up to Riverside Elementary School. The red brick building loomed before them, its windows gleaming in the early sunlight. Jack glanced in the rearview mirror at Mia and Lily, both dressed in new clothes he'd bought them over the weekend. Their backpacks looked almost too big for their small frames. "Remember what we talked about?" Jack asked, his gruff voice softened slightly. "If anything happens, go to the teacher," Mia recited, fidgeting with her jacket zipper. "And if someone's mean," Lily started. "Walk away," Mia finished, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely convinced of this strategy. Jack stepped out of the truck and helped them down. Other parents were leading their children into the building, the air filled with chatter and the sound of small feet scuffing against concrete. He felt oddly out of place among them, this gruff ex-firefighter with his borrowed daughters. As they walked toward the entrance, Jack noticed Lily's small hand slip into his. Her palm was sweaty with nervousness. On his other side, Mia walked with determined steps, but he could see her casting uncertain glances at the crowds of children. "You'll be fine," Jack said, more gruffly than he intended. He cleared his throat and tried again. "You've got each other." The classroom was bright and colorful, with alphabet charts on the walls and tiny desks arranged in neat rows. The teacher, Mrs. Bennett, greeted them warmly, her smile genuine as she bent down to the girls' level. "Welcome to our class," she said. "Would you like to choose your seats?" Mia immediately pulled Lily toward two empty desks near the window. Jack watched them settle in, something tight forming in his chest. He hadn't felt this kind of worry in years, this constant awareness of other lives depending on him. "They'll be fine, Mr. Callahan," Mrs. Bennett assured him quietly. Jack nodded stiffly and turned to leave, but not before catching one last glimpse of the twins. Mia was already taking out her pencils, while Lily waved shyly at him. The morning passed slowly. Jack tried to focus on household chores, but he found himself checking his phone every few minutes. When it finally rang around noon, his heart dropped at the sight of the school's number. "Mr. Callahan, this is Principal Warner. There's been an incident with Mia." Jack's truck ate up the distance to the school in record time. The principal's office was exactly what he expected: wood paneling, certificates on the walls, and that particular smell of authority that seemed universal to all school offices. Mia sat in an oversized chair, her legs dangling, her face set in a familiar, stubborn expression. Beside her, Lily sniffled quietly, tears tracking down her cheeks. Jack's chest tightened at the sight. "What happened?" he demanded, perhaps more harshly than he should have. Principal Warner, a tall woman with graying hair, sighed. "Mia got into an altercation with another student during recess." "She was making fun of Lily," Mia muttered, her small hands balled into fists in her lap. Jack turned to her. "Who?" "Tommy Matthews," Principal Warner explained. "He said some unkind things about their mother, suggested she didn't want them anymore, called Lily, well, he used the word garbage." Jack felt his own fists clench involuntarily. He looked at Mia. Her face was red, her eyes bright with unshed tears, but her jaw was set in that determined way he'd come to recognize. "We don't hit people," he said, keeping his voice stern despite the pride and anger warring in his chest. "No matter what they say." "But he was mean to Lily," Mia burst out, her voice cracking. He said... She couldn't finish, her breath hitching. Jack crouched down in front of her chair, meeting her eyes. They were so full of hurt and anger, emotions he recognized all too well. "I get it," he said softly, "but there are other ways to stand up for your sister." Lily reached over and grabbed Mia's hand, their fingers interlocking automatically. The gesture made Jack's throat tight. After a discussion about appropriate responses to bullying and a one-day suspension for both Mia and Tommy, Jack led the girls back to his truck. The ride home was quiet, heavy with unspoken words. That evening, Jack made spaghetti, one of the few meals he could cook well. Mia sat at the kitchen table, pushing the noodles around her plate without eating. Lily had already finished and gone to watch TV in the living room. Jack watched Mia for a while, recognizing the storm of emotions behind her silence. He'd worn that same expression many times himself. "You fought for Lily today," he said quietly, breaking the stillness. "That's good. But next time, let me fight for you too." Mia didn't respond. She continued to stare at her plate, her fork making patterns in the sauce. But after a long moment, she shifted in her chair, leaning over until her head rested against Jack's arm. Jack remained still, feeling the slight weight of her trust against him. He didn't move, didn't speak, just let her stay there in the quiet of the kitchen, the sound of the TV drifting in from the other room. Late sun streamed through the kitchen as Jack fixed a leaky pipe under the sink. His phone rang, making him bang his head as he reached for it. Seeing "Child Services," his stomach dropped. "Callahan," he answered. "Mr. Callahan, Sarah Mitchell here. Do you have a moment?" Jack leaned on the counter. "What's happened?" "It's about Rebecca Torres." Through the window, Mia and Lily played in the snow, attempting to build a snowman. "Rebecca never arrived at New Hope Women's Shelter yesterday," Sarah said. The news hit hard. "How long has she been missing?" 48 hours. She missed her check-in and counseling. Given this violation, her chances for custody are gone. The court will consider permanent placement. Jack watched Lily fall into the snow while Mia laughed. They seemed so at home here. After the call, Jack stood watching the twins play in the golden light. They moved in perfect sync, unaware their mother might never return. "Girls, inside for hot chocolate." They rushed in, tracking snow. Jack helped with winter clothes and sent them to change. Then he slipped out to his truck, needing a moment alone. In the cold cab, he gripped the wheel. For 10 years, this had been his refuge from trauma and guilt. Now, he broke down silently, not from old pain, but fear of losing them. These girls had become vital to him, their laughter healing old wounds. Through the windshield, warm light spilled from his house, their house. Inside, 2 children waited for hot chocolate, planning their next adventure. Jack held the wheel tighter, tears flowing not from guilt, but from the thought of letting them go. The nightmare came without warning, ripping through Jack's carefully constructed walls. In his dreams, the flames were as vivid as they'd been 10 years ago, dancing across the walls of his old house, consuming everything he loved. The heat felt real, the smoke choking him as he fought his way through burning rooms, calling out names that turned to ash in his mouth. His daughter's scream pierced through the roar of the fire. "Daddy!" Jack thrashed in his bed, tangled in sweat-soaked sheets. The remnants of the dream clung to him like smoke, making it hard to breathe. His heart hammered against his ribs as he sat up, disoriented in the darkness of his bedroom. That's when he saw her, a small figure standing in the doorway, barely visible in the dim light from the hallway. Mia stood there in her pajamas, her dark hair messy from sleep, watching him with concerned eyes. "You were yelling," she said softly, her voice careful and measured in a way no 6-year-olds should be. Jack ran a trembling hand over his face, trying to shake off the lingering terror of the nightmare. His t-shirt was damp with sweat, and his breathing was still ragged. "Just a bad dream, kid," he managed to say, his voice hoarse. Mia didn't move from the doorway, but she shifted her weight from one foot to the other, hesitating. Then, with the directness that always caught him off guard, she asked, "Was it about your daughter?" The question hit him like a physical blow. Jack's whole body went rigid, his hands gripping the edge of the mattress. No one had said it out loud before, not since he'd moved to this house, not since he'd become the town's resident recluse. He never talked about her, never acknowledged the gaping hole in his life that her absence had left. But Mia stood there, those sharp eyes fixed on him, waiting. There was no judgment in her gaze, no pity, just a kind of understanding that seemed far too mature for her years. "Lily and me," she continued, taking a tentative step into the room. "We know you miss someone. We see you looking at that picture sometimes, the one you keep in the drawer." Jack's throat tightened. He thought of the photograph he couldn't bring himself to display but couldn't bear to throw away either. His little girl on her 5th birthday, chocolate cake smeared across her grinning face, his wife laughing beside her. He kept it hidden in his bedside drawer, but sometimes, late at night, he'd take it out and look at it, torturing himself with memories of happiness he'd failed to protect. Now he looked at Mia, really looked at her. She stood there in her 2 big pajamas, her face serious and open, waiting for him to say something. Behind her, he could hear the soft padding of feet. Lily, no doubt awakened by his shouts, hovering uncertainly in the hallway. Something broke inside him then, a wall he'd built so carefully starting to crumble. "Her name was Sarah," he said, the words coming out rough and unpracticed. "She was 7 when—" He couldn't finish the sentence, but Mia nodded as if she understood. "Was she nice?" Lily's small voice came from the doorway. She stepped into view, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Jack's chest ached, but for the first time talking about Sarah didn't feel like drowning. "Yeah," he said softly. She was a lot like you two, actually. Always laughing, always getting into trouble." "Did she like hot chocolate with extra marshmallows too?" Lily asked, edging closer to the bed. A ghost of a smile touched Jack's lips. She insisted on counting them, had to have exactly 7, 1 for each year. The girls exchanged glances, and then, without warning, they both climbed onto his bed. Jack stiffened for a moment, but didn't stop them. Mia settled on one side of him, Lily on the other, their small, warm bodies providing an anchor to reality, chasing away the last wisps of his nightmare. "What else did she like?" Mia asked. Jack found himself talking, sharing small pieces of Sarah that he'd kept locked away for so long. He told them about her collection of firefighter toys, how she'd make him act out rescue scenarios with her, how she loved strawberry ice cream but hated strawberry jam, how she'd sing made-up songs while he drove her to school. With each memory shared, the weight in his chest lifted slightly. The pain was still there. It would always be there. But it felt different now, less like a crushing force and more like an old wound finally starting to heal. Finally, when the stories ran dry and Lily was fighting to keep her eyes open, Mia looked up at him. Her face was serious again, touched with a vulnerability he rarely saw in her. "I don't want to go to another house," she said quietly. Jack's heart pounded against his ribs. He thought about Rebecca, gone without a trace. He thought about the caseworker's words about permanent placement. He thought about his empty house and how it wasn't empty anymore. "You won't," he said, and this time he meant it. The words felt like a promise, not just to them, but to himself. Jack chopped wood in his yard as the afternoon sun cast long shadows. The rhythmic splitting usually calmed his mind, until the mail truck's unusual double honk drew his attention. The carrier handed him a certified envelope bearing the county court seal. Jack signed for it, his work-worn hands clumsy. Walking back, he heard Mia and Lily laughing upstairs. Inside, he read the documents. A custody hearing in 3 weeks would determine if the girls entered foster care, or if he could petition for custody. Legal terms blurred before him as doubt crept in. From his window, he saw signs of the girls everywhere. Scattered toys, snow footprints, small boots by the door. The thought of losing them was unbearable. He called Frank Holloway, a lawyer from his firefighting days. After explaining the situation, Frank warned him it wouldn't be easy. The courts preferred traditional foster families, and they'd scrutinize his past. "I don't care," Jack said firmly. "I'm not letting them go." Later, he found the girls asleep in their room. Mia sat against the wall surrounded by stuffed animals, while Lily clutched a book. As he tucked them in, Lily stirred. "Mr. Jack?" she murmured. "Right here, kid." She smiled drowsily. "Good." Looking at their peaceful faces in the moonlight, Jack knew with certainty this was his fight now. Sunlight filled the kitchen as Jack sat with Mia and Lily for breakfast. The girls exchanged furtive glances while Mia fidgeted beneath the table. She pulled out a pink flyer and pushed it toward Jack. "Here," she said nervously. Jack read Annual Father-Daughter Dance at the top, with details for next Friday. His throat tightened as he studied the dancing figures in the margins. "What's this?" he asked roughly. "Just a school thing," Mia mumbled. "We don't have to go." Lily remained silent, shoulders slumped. Their disappointment hung heavy in the air. Jack considered his years of avoiding social events. Though crowds and formal occasions made him uneasy, he saw their barely concealed hope. "I guess I could dig out an old suit," he said. The girl's head shot up. "Really?" Mia beamed. "You'll take us?" Lily whispered. Jack nodded and they burst into excited chatter about dresses. That evening, Jack struggled with his tie, the suit feeling foreign after years in work clothes. The girls emerged in purple and blue dresses, faces glowing. At the transformed gymnasium, curious parents stared at the town recluse and his unexpected companions. The girls held his hands, oblivious to the attention. They danced to unfamiliar songs, Jack following their lead. During a slow dance, both girls swayed with him, and something clicked into place. This felt right. Later, tucking them in, Lily murmured sleepily, "You're kinda like our dad, Mr. Jack." He paused, feeling the truth settle in his chest. "Yeah, kid," he whispered. "I guess I am." The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through Jack's living room windows when the unexpected knock came. He wasn't expecting anyone. The girls were at their after-school program, and he'd planned to use the quiet time to review paperwork for the upcoming court hearing. The sharp rap at the door made him pause. Something about it felt different from the usual delivery person or neighbor's knock. When he opened the door, his breath caught in his throat. Rebecca Torres stood on his porch, looking like a shadow of the woman he'd met at the police station months ago. Her clothes hung loose on her thin frame, and dark circles rimmed her eyes. Her hands fidgeted with the hem of her worn jacket, and shame clouded her face as she met his gaze. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack's protective instincts flared. The girls were finally settling into a routine, finally feeling secure. He didn't want anything disrupting that, but something in Rebecca's demeanor stopped him from turning her away. He stepped aside, letting her enter. The contrast between them was stark. Rebecca, small and uncertain in the doorway, and Jack, solid and guarded, his arms crossed over his chest. "The girls aren't here," he said gruffly. "I know," Rebecca replied. "I waited until their school hours. I've been watching from a distance." The admission should have angered him, but instead it just made his chest ache. He could picture her, hiding across the street, watching her daughters walk to school, unable to approach them. They moved to the kitchen table where Jack had spent countless mornings with the twins. Rebecca's eyes lingered on the children's artwork magnetized to the refrigerator, the small shoes lined up by the back door, the stack of library books on the counter. "You've made a home for them," she said softly. Jack remained silent, waiting. Rebecca's hands trembled as she placed them flat on the table, as if trying to steady herself. "I ran," she admitted, her voice cracking. "After that day at the police station, I couldn't face what I'd become, what I'd done to them." She drew a shaky breath. "I hit rock bottom, spent weeks just existing, but then I did something I should have done years ago. I checked myself into a rehab program." Jack's expression remained neutral, but his mind was racing. He'd wondered where she'd disappeared to, what had happened to make her miss her court dates. I'm getting clean, she continued. Finally doing the work I should have done when Lucas died. But, she swallowed hard. I know I'm out of chances. The courts won't give them back to me, and maybe they shouldn't. Jack uncrossed his arms, leaning forward slightly. What do you want, Rebecca? Her eyes welled with tears, but her voice remained steady. I want what's best for them, and I know that's not me. The words hung heavy in the kitchen air. Jack hadn't expected this. He'd prepared himself for a fight, for pleas and promises, for the complicated mess of custody battles. But not for this. Rebecca reached into her jacket pocket with trembling fingers. She pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper, smoothing it carefully on the table between them. If I sign this, I give up my parental rights, she explained, her voice barely holding together. It would clear the way for adoption. Jack stared at the document, his heart pounding. He knew what this meant. With Rebecca's rights terminated, he could legally adopt Mia and Lily, give them the stability they desperately needed, make their makeshift family official. Rebecca's eyes shone with unshed tears as she looked at him. I want them to be safe, and I know you'll keep them safe. She pulled a pen from her pocket, her hand shaking. I've watched you with them. You love them like they're your own. And they... She had to pause, collecting herself. They love you too. I can see it in the way they look at you, the way they trust you. Jack sat there, speechless. He'd spent weeks preparing arguments for the court, ready to fight for the girls. But he'd never wanted to take someone's children away. The weight of what Rebecca was offering, the magnitude of her sacrifice, left him stunned. I know what people think, Rebecca continued, her voice thick with emotion, that I'm a terrible mother, that I don't love them enough. But this... She gestured to the paper between them. This is because I love them more than anything, more than my own selfish need to keep them. They deserve a real home, a real father. They deserve you. Jack looked at the woman across from him, this mother who was willing to break her own heart to piece her daughter's lives back together. He saw beyond the mistakes and the struggles to the core of her love for her children, a love so deep it could let them go. Are you sure about this? He asked quietly. Rebecca nodded, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. I've never been more sure of anything. She picked up the pen, her hand steadying as she brought it to the paper. Just promise me one thing. Jack met her gaze, seeing all the pain and hope mixed there. Promise me they'll know I love them? That this wasn't because I didn't want them? Days later, Jack stood outside the imposing courthouse, his fingers fumbling with the unfamiliar confines of his suit jacket. The fabric felt stiff and foreign against his skin, so different from his usual worn flannel shirts. His hands, rough and marked with the calluses of years of physical labor, seemed out of place against the polished brass door handles. Through the courthouse windows, he could see Mia and Lily sitting in the waiting area. They wore matching blue dresses that they'd picked out specially for today, their hair neatly braided. Despite their best efforts to sit still, they fidgeted in their chairs, casting anxious glances toward the door. Even from here, Jack could see the mix of hope and nervousness in their expressions. Frank Holloway approached from behind, his leather briefcase in hand. The lawyer looked perfectly at home in his suit, his tie perfectly knotted, his shoes gleaming. He placed a reassuring hand on Jack's shoulder. You ready for this? Frank asked, his voice carrying years of courtroom experience. Jack exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the cold morning air. Not even a little. Inside, the courtroom felt impossibly large and formal. Jack sat at the defendant's table, his chair uncomfortable and his collar too tight. The opposing counsel, a sharp-faced woman in a crisp suit, presented her arguments with practiced precision. Your Honor, she said, her voice carrying through the quiet room. While Mr. Callahan's intentions may be admirable, we must consider the children's best interests. He is an aging bachelor with no parenting experience, no support system, no history of providing long-term care for minors. Jack's jaw clenched, the muscle ticking visibly. His hands, resting on the table, curled into fists. When Frank signaled it was his turn to speak, Jack stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I didn't plan for this," he said, his voice rough but steady. But neither did they. He gestured toward Mia and Lily, who sat watching him with wide eyes. "And I'm not walking away." The judge leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Callahan, raising 2 young girls is a significant responsibility. What makes you believe you're equipped for this task?" Jack straightened his shoulders. "Because I already am doing it. Every day I make their lunches. I check their homework. I kiss their scraped knees and chase away their nightmares." His voice grew stronger with each word. "I'm not perfect, but I'm there, and I'll always be there." Rebecca took the stand next. She looked better than she had that day at Jack's house. Cleaner, more put together. But her voice cracked as she spoke. "I know I've made mistakes," she said, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "So many mistakes. But choosing Jack Callahan to raise my daughters isn't one of them." She paused, gathering herself. "He's already been more of a father than I could ever be a mother. He loves them, and they love him." The courtroom fell silent when it was time for the girls to speak. Mia stood first, her small hand firmly gripping Lily's. Despite her obvious nervousness, her chin lifted with determination. "We don't want to go anywhere else," she declared, her voice clear and strong. "We want to stay with Mr. Jack." Lily nodded beside her, adding in a softer voice, "He makes us feel safe." Jack had to blink rapidly, his vision suddenly blurry. He focused on his breathing, trying to keep his emotions in check as the girls returned to their seats. The judge took his time, reviewing the papers before him with careful consideration. The silence in the courtroom grew heavy, pressing down on everyone present. Jack could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the weight of everything hanging on this moment. Finally, the judge looked up, his expression serious but kind. His voice was steady and clear as he announced, "Having reviewed all evidence and testimony, this court awards full custody of Mia and Lily Torres to Jack Callahan." The words seemed to hang in the air for a moment before their meaning fully registered. Jack exhaled, a breath he felt like he'd been holding for months. Before he could fully process what had happened, 2 small bodies crashed into him. Mia and Lily wrapped their arms around his waist, hugging him tight enough to squeeze the air from his lungs. For the first time in a decade, Jack didn't feel the crushing weight of his lost family. Instead, he felt the warm, solid presence of the family he'd found. He wrapped his arms around the girls, holding them close, knowing that this moment marked the beginning of something new, something whole. Jack sat at the breakfast table, watching Mia and Lily devour their pancakes. 3 weeks had passed since the judge's ruling, but the reality of it still hadn't fully settled in his mind. Every morning he woke with a start, his heart racing until he heard their familiar giggles echoing through the house. The morning light streamed through the kitchen windows, catching the syrup dripping from Lily's fork. The kitchen, once a place of silent, mechanical routine, now buzzed with life. Scattered drawings covered the refrigerator, held up by mismatched magnets. 2 lunchboxes sat ready on the counter, decorated with stickers and doodles. Jack sipped his coffee, hiding a small smile as Mia attempted to create a smiley face on her pancake with whipped cream. The quiet contentment of the moment shattered when she looked up, her expression suddenly serious. "Mr. Jack," Mia said, setting down her fork, "do we have to keep our last name?" The question hit him like a physical blow. Jack's coffee cup froze halfway to his mouth, his hand suspended in midair. "What do you mean?" Mia shrugged, pushing a piece of pancake around her plate. Her casual tone contrasted with the weight of her words. "Torres doesn't feel right anymore. We're not really part of that family now." Before Jack could formulate a response, Lily's soft voice joined the conversation. She sat straighter in her chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap, a gesture that always reminded Jack of how much older she sometimes seemed than her years. "Can we have your name?" Lily asked, her eyes wide and earnest. The fork Jack had been holding clattered against his plate, the sound sharp in the sudden silence of the kitchen. His throat felt tight, his chest constricting with emotions he couldn't quite name. These two little girls who had stumbled into his life on a snowy night, who had somehow wormed their way past every wall he'd built, were asking to take his name, to become Callahans. He wasn't prepared for this. Not for the hope in their eyes, not for the way they looked at him, like he was someone worthy of being their father, like he hadn't failed at protecting his own family years ago. Jack cleared his throat, his voice rougher than usual. That's not something you have to decide right away. Mia's face fell into a frown, her brows drawing together in that stubborn expression he'd come to know well. But we want to… You don't want us to? Lily asked, her voice small and uncertain. She twisted the hem of her shirt between her fingers, a nervous habit she'd had since the day Jack met her. Jack rubbed his face with both hands, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they were asking. It wasn't that he didn't want them to take his name. The truth was far more complicated. Every time he looked at them, he saw not just Mia and Lily, but also echoes of his daughter, the one he couldn't save. The weight of that responsibility, of being worthy of their trust and love, pressed heavily on his shoulders. The girls watched him, waiting for an answer. Mia's jaw was set in determination, while Lily's eyes held a mixture of hope and fear. They had already lost so much in their young lives. The last thing Jack wanted was to add to that pain. Later that night, after the girls had gone to bed, Jack sat alone at the kitchen table. The house was quiet except for the occasional creak of settling wood and the distant sound of the girls' nightlight humming. The adoption paperwork lay spread before him, the pages crisp and official under the warm glow of the overhead light. His eyes fixed on the section about name changes. The empty lines seemed to taunt him, waiting to be filled. Mia and Lily Callahan. The names echoed in his mind, feeling both foreign and somehow right. Jack's fingers traced over the blank spaces. He thought about Mia's fierce protectiveness of her sister, about Lily's quiet strength. He thought about pancake breakfasts and homework help, about bandaged knees and bedtime stories, about two little girls who had chosen him, who wanted to be his daughters in every way possible. For the first time since the court hearing, since that snowy night when they first appeared on his doorstep, Jack allowed himself to truly think of them as his daughters. Not just as children he was caring for, not as a temporary responsibility, but as his girls, his family. The realization settled over him like a warm blanket, both comforting and terrifying. The paperwork remained blank before him, waiting for a decision that could change all their lives forever. Jack watched Mia and Lily listen intently to his firefighting story, their enthusiasm reminding him of his former passion. He described carrying 60 pounds of gear up 6 flights of stairs. The girls marveled at the weight, and when Mia asked about saving everyone, Jack confirmed they had, including a cat. Seeing their excited faces, Mia asked to visit the firehouse. Jack hesitated, his grip tightening on his mug. Though the thought made him anxious, he agreed when they pleaded. At the station, Chief Reynolds greeted them warmly. He led the tour while Jack followed, watching the girls explore with wonder. Mia tried on an oversized helmet while Lily admired the fire engine. Reynolds quietly asked if Jack considered returning. The question startled him. Watching the girls play, Jack realized he'd changed since leaving. The chief assured him the door remained open. The current crew showed them around, even letting them use the water hose. As they left, Mia asked if he'd enjoyed being a firefighter. "I liked helping people," Jack said. "You still do," Lily replied. The evening settled over Jack's house like a soft blanket, bringing with it the familiar sounds of dinner cleanup and homework discussions. He stood at the sink, washing dishes while Mia worked on her math problems at the kitchen table. Lily sat next to her sister, drawing pictures with her colored pencils, her tongue sticking out in concentration. The phone's sharp ring cut through the peaceful atmosphere, making Jack's hands pause mid-scrub. He dried them quickly on a dish towel and reached for the receiver, expecting it to be Frank with more paperwork updates. And, "Hello? Jack?" The voice on the other end was hesitant, familiar. "It's Rebecca." Jack's grip tightened on the phone. He hadn't heard from her in months, not since the day she signed away her rights. He glanced at the girls, but they remained focused on their activities, unaware that their mother's voice was traveling through the wire. "Rebecca," he said, keeping his voice low. Everything okay? There was a pause filled with a static of unsaid words. Yes, I'm doing better. I've been in treatment, following the program. She took a deep breath. I was wondering if I could see them. Jack's protective instincts flared immediately. The girls were finally settling in, finally feeling secure. But he knew he couldn't deny them the chance to see their mother. It wasn't his right to make that choice. When? He asked, turning away from the kitchen to speak more privately. Tomorrow evening? If that works for you all? Jack ran a hand through his hair, thinking, I'll have to ask them first. Of course, Rebecca said quickly. I understand if they don't want to. After hanging up, Jack turned back to the kitchen. Mia had abandoned her math homework and was watching him with sharp eyes. Sometimes he forgot how perceptive she was. Who was that? She asked, though something in her expression suggested she already knew. Jack pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. Your mom. She wants to see you both tomorrow. Lily's pencil stopped moving. She looked up, her eyes wide with uncertainty. Mia's face was harder to read, a mix of emotions flickering across it like shadows. You don't have to if you don't want to, Jack assured them quickly. It's your choice. The girls exchanged one of their silent twin looks, having an entire conversation without words. Finally, Mia spoke. We want to see her. The next evening, Jack drove them to a small cafe on the edge of town. His hands were steady on the wheel, but his mind was racing. He'd spent the night wondering if this was the right decision, if seeing Rebecca would upset the delicate balance they'd found. Rebecca was already there when they arrived, sitting at a corner table. Jack's first thought was how different she looked. The desperate, haunted woman who had shown up at his door months ago was gone. This Rebecca was cleaner, healthier, but also somehow smaller, as if life had worn away her edges. She stood when she saw them, her hands clasped tightly together. Hi, she said softly, her eyes drinking in the sight of her daughters. The girls hung back slightly, partially hidden behind Jack. He could feel their uncertainty, their hesitation. This wasn't the same mother they remembered. It's okay, he murmured, giving them a gentle nudge forward. Mia moved first, taking a few steps toward Rebecca. Lily followed, holding her sister's hand. Rebecca knelt down, opening her arms, and the girls stepped into her embrace. The hug was gentle, almost tentative, so different from the desperate way they had clung to each other months ago. They sat down, Jack taking a seat slightly apart to give them space but staying close enough to provide security. Rebecca ordered hot chocolate for the girls, and they sipped it carefully while she asked about school, about their new life. Are you happy? Rebecca asked, her voice catching slightly. Mia nodded, some of her initial hesitation fading. Yeah, Mr. Jack takes care of us. Lily, who had been quiet until now, suddenly spoke up. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but her words carried clearly across the table. We call him Dad now. Jack felt his chest tighten at the words. They had started using Dad recently, but hearing it said out loud to Rebecca made it feel more real, more permanent. Rebecca's eyes met his and he saw a flash of emotion there. Pain, acceptance, and something else. Understanding, maybe. She smiled, but it was bittersweet, like sunshine through rain. I think that's good, she said quietly, reaching across to squeeze Lily's hand. They talked for a while longer, but the conversation remained gentle, careful, like walking on thin ice. The girls told her about their new school, about their friends, about the father-daughter dance. Rebecca listened intently, drinking in every detail of the life she was no longer part of. When it was time to leave, Rebecca hugged them again. This time it felt different, like a goodbye, but not a sad one, more like closing the final page of a book you know ends well. Jack hung back as Rebecca walked them to the door. She paused before stepping out, turning to look at him. In her face, he saw something he hadn't expected: relief. The weight of guilt and uncertainty that had haunted her features months ago was gone. She knew, looking at her daughter's happy faces, that she had made the right choice. And in that moment, Jack finally understood something too. He hadn't stolen someone's children. He hadn't replaced their mother. He had simply become the father they needed when they needed him most. The morning dawned crisp and clear, a perfect spring day that seemed to mirror the brightness of the occasion. Jack stood in front of his bedroom mirror, adjusting his tie for what felt like the 100th time. His hands weren't quite steady. They hadn't been all morning. A year had passed since the court had granted him custody of Mia and Lily. A year of learning, growing, and healing together. Now they stood on the threshold of making it official. Today, the twins would legally become Callahans. "Dad, have you seen my blue ribbon?" Mia's voice echoed down the hallway, followed by the sound of drawers being opened and closed. "Check the laundry room," Jack called back, smiling despite his nerves. The girls had been up since dawn, too excited to sleep. Their new dresses hung perfectly pressed. One blue, one purple, matching outfits they'd picked out specially for this day. Lily appeared in his doorway, already dressed, her hair neatly braided. She watched him struggle with his tie for a moment before stepping forward. "Here, let me help." Her small fingers worked quickly, straightening the knot with surprising skill. "Ms. Thompson taught us how to tie them in art class when we made Father's Day cards." Jack's throat tightened. He looked down at his daughter, and saw the same quiet strength that had first touched his heart that snowy night over a year ago. "Thanks, kid," he managed, his voice rough with emotion. The courthouse looked different in spring than it had during that winter custody battle. Flowers bloomed in carefully tended beds, and sunlight streamed through the high windows, casting warm patterns on the marble floor. Frank met them at the entrance, his usual serious expression softened by a genuine smile. "Ready for this, Callahan?" Jack nodded, holding tight to Mia and Lily's hands. The girls were practically vibrating with excitement, their new patent leather shoes clicking on the floor as they walked to the courtroom. Inside, the atmosphere was different from their last visit. No tension, no fear, just joy and anticipation. A few close friends had come to witness the occasion. Chief Reynolds from the firehouse, Jack's neighbor Mrs. Peterson, who often watched the girls after school, and even Rebecca sitting quietly in the back row. The judge entered, the same one who had granted Jack custody a year ago. He smiled warmly at the family as they approached the bench. "Well," he said, looking over his glasses at them, "this is certainly a happier occasion than our last meeting." He shuffled through some papers, then looked directly at Mia and Lily. "Girls, do you understand what's happening today?" Mia nodded eagerly. "You're making us officially Callahans," Lily added softly, "like we already are in our hearts." The judge's smile widened. He turned to Jack. "And Mr. Callahan, you understand the responsibilities you're taking on? Though I must say, you've already proven yourself more than capable over the past year." Jack straightened his shoulders. "Yes, Your Honor, I understand completely." The proceedings moved forward smoothly. Papers were signed, statements were made, and with each passing moment, Jack felt his heart growing fuller. This wasn't just about making it legal, it was about making it real, permanent, unbreakable. Finally, the judge picked up his pen for the last signature. "Would you like to say anything, Mr. Callahan?" Jack hadn't prepared a speech, he wasn't good with words, never had been. But looking down at Mia and Lily, seeing their hopeful faces turned up toward him, he knew exactly what needed to be said. His voice was rough but clear as he spoke. "You saved me as much as I saved you." The simple truth of those words hung in the air. Mia squeezed his hand tight, and Lily pressed closer to his side. They understood, as they always had, exactly what he meant. The judge signed the final paper with a flourish. "Then, by the power vested in me by the state, I hereby declare this adoption final and complete. Congratulations to the Callahan family." Mia and Lily erupted in cheers, throwing their arms around Jack's waist. He held them close, not caring about the tears that threatened to spill from his eyes. Around them, their small group of witnesses applauded. After the ceremony, they celebrated with a small gathering at home. Chief Reynolds brought a cake decorated with "Welcome to the Family" in bright blue frosting. Mrs. Peterson cried happy tears as she hugged each of them. Rebecca stayed briefly, giving the girls tight hugs and whispering something in Jack's ear that made him nod solemnly. As evening fell, the guests departed, leaving the new official family alone. Jack helped the girls change into their pajamas, carefully hanging up their special dresses. They were tired, but happy, their eyes bright with joy despite their yawns. He tucked them into their beds that were truly theirs now, in a room that was truly their home. Mia was already half asleep, but she managed a drowsy, "Love you, Dad." As Jack turned to leave, Lily's soft voice caught him. "Good night, Dad." He froze in the doorway, that word, Dad, hitting him differently tonight. He'd heard it before, but now it was official, legal, real. And for the first time in years, Jack smiled. A real smile that reached his eyes and warmed his heart. Because he finally had what he thought he'd lost forever. A family. If you enjoyed the story of Jack, I handpicked this next story that you will love. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it. Jack, I handpicked this next story that you will love. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.